Kayla adjusted her carry-on, feeling the familiar rush of excitement and mild nerves as she walked down the jet bridge toward the massive 747 waiting at the gate. She hadn't flown in years and was looking forward to this quick flight from JFK to MCO. The cabin buzzed with the sound of other passengers settling in, and as she slid into her window seat, she felt a reassuring sense of calm. The hustle and bustle of New York City was behind her now, and ahead lay a few hours of peaceful escape. After a smooth takeoff, Kayla found herself drifting to sleep, her head resting comfortably against the cool window. The sound of the engines, a constant hum, lulled her further into slumber. She lost track of time entirely, wrapped in dreams of bright Florida skies and palm trees swaying in the breeze. When she opened her eyes, something felt wrong. She looked around, her groggy mind struggling to process what she was seeing. The once full plane was almost empty. Rows of seats were vacant, and a strange, eerie silence filled the cabin. Glancing around, she counted 10 other people remained, scattered across the vast interior, some of them looking just as bewildered as she felt. Rubbing her eyes, Kayla tried to shake off the lingering sleep, feeling a chill that seemed to seep in from the dim lighting and the unsettling quiet. She unbuckled her seatbelt, unsure of what she'd find, but feeling compelled to understand where everyone had gone. The cockpit door swung open, and the pilot, a wiry man with graying hair and a face that looked like it had seen one too many strange skies, stepped out. His expression was one of forced calm, but his eyes betrayed a hint of panic. He cleared his throat, looking over at the remaining passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen, the few of you who are left," he began awkwardly. "I don't have a standard announcement for this situation, so I'll just give it to you straight. Our plane encountered something in the air. We seem to have flown through a time rip as best as we can tell." "A time rip?" Kayla's voice cut through the cabin, her face flushed with outrage. She rose from her seat, hands on her hips. "Are you kidding me? I was on my way to Disney World. I had fast passes booked, dining reservations. Do you have any idea how hard it is to get a reservation at Cinderella's royal table these days?" She huffed, eyes blazing. "You're telling me some mystical time nonsense has interrupted my vacation? This is completely unacceptable." The pilot, clearly taken aback, raised his hands in a placating gesture. "I understand this is unsettling." "Unsettling? Unsettling doesn't even begin to cover it," Kayla said, her voice rising to an impressive pitch. "This is negligence. Delta and Boeing are going to be hearing from my lawyer as soon as I get off this plane. This is going to cost you millions. I want compensation. I want to speak to whoever's responsible for that time rip." She gestured wildly to the empty rows around her, her rant growing increasingly elaborate. The other passengers exchanged nervous glances, inching away slightly as Kayla continued her tirade, her voice filling the empty cabin with accusations against everyone from the airline to aerospace engineers to the mystical forces of the universe. As she continued, a strange man in the back, a passenger no one had noticed before, gave a mischievous smile, almost as if he were savoring the chaos she was stirring up. He leaned back, folding his arms with a smirk that suggested he knew. As Kayla continued her tirade, a businessman named William, seated across the aisle, sprang to his feet, clutching his phone in panic. "I have a meeting at 9, he shouted, his voice a crescendo of anxiety. "A meeting at 9! I'll sue everyone on this plane, Delta, Boeing, and every single engineer who built this flying piece of scrap metal. My quarterly earnings report is on the line." The pilot sighed, his attempt at calming the passengers clearly losing ground. Meanwhile, Pat, a serene figure with a calming presence, approached Kayla with a gentle smile. They reached into their bag and pulled out a small potted palm tree, its leaves waving delicately. "Here," they said, extending it toward Kayla. "I always bring this with me. It helps me cope when things get tense. Maybe it'll help you too." Kayla blinked, momentarily stunned out of her fury by the unexpected gift. But before she could respond, Mitch, the mischievous man who had been watching everything with theatrical amusement, noticed the tiny tree. His face contorted with suspicion, and he pointed a trembling finger at it. "Oh, so that's how it is, huh?" he bellowed, glaring at the palm tree as though it had personally insulted him. I knew it! These blasted things are behind everything. First, they infiltrate our beaches, then our landscapes, and now they're dragging planes into time rips? I'll see that palm tree in court. The passengers were now in various states of bewilderment and terror as Mitch advanced on the innocent plant, shouting accusations at it as if it were on trial. The pilot took a deep breath, raising his voice over the chaos. All right, everyone, please, please. We're diverting to Atlanta. It's the nearest safe landing option. We should be there in approximately 40 minutes. But the plane seemed to have a mind of its own, continuing on a steady course toward Atlanta, unaffected by the rising wave of complaints, threats, and accusations echoing through the cabin. As the minutes ticked by, tension brewed. Each remaining passenger clung to their own brand of panic, impatience, or, like Mitch, out. The tension thickened as the plane drew closer to Atlanta. The pilot, now sweating through his uniform, attempted to contact the tower. Static. He switched to the emergency frequency. Still nothing. Heart pounding, he tried the military channels, his last hope for a response. But the radio was met with silence, not a single reply in the void. He turned in his seat, his voice shaking as he made an announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, it appears there's no one responding on any frequency. We're going to have to make an emergency landing. There may not be anyone there. A collective gasp filled the cabin, and within seconds, chaos erupted again. Are you saying no one's going to be there to bring my bags to my Disney resort? Kayla's voice rose, full Karen mode activated. I'll have you know I have Dole Whip waiting for me at Magic Kingdom, and I am not missing that for some half-baked emergency landing. You're all paying for this. All of you. William's face was pale as he clutched his briefcase, eyes wide with desperation. This will cost me my job, he wailed. My boss is not going to understand this time warp nonsense. I'll be fired for missing my meeting. His voice took on a desperate edge as he gestured wildly around him. I'll sue everyone. The airline, the pilot, Delta, Boeing, every last person who had anything to do with this flying tin can. Meanwhile, Mitch had locked eyes with Pat's little potted palm tree, his expression that of a prosecutor about to deliver the final blow. Oh, you thought you'd get away with it, didn't you? He sneered at the palm tree, raising his finger in accusation. Well, I've got news for you. You're going straight to jail for this, you fronded menace. Pat held the palm tree protectively, glancing around with wide eyes, as if questioning every life choice that had led them to this moment. They muttered to themselves, maybe this was a bit too much excitement for one day. The pilot returned to his controls, grimly determined to land the plane safely, despite the radio silence and the growing chorus of grievances echoing through the empty cabin. The landing was rough, a jarring bump that rattled everyone's nerves, but the plane touched down safely. As they rolled to a stop on the runway, everyone peered through the windows, hoping to see flashing lights, emergency vehicles, anything. But there was nothing. No ground crew, no other planes, and not a single soul in sight. The pilot turned to the passengers, defeated. We'll have to use the emergency chute to disembark. Please, everyone, proceed in an orderly manner. Kayla scoffed. Orderly? As if this situation is remotely orderly. Still, she joined the line, and one by one they slid down the chute onto the cold, empty tarmac. As they regrouped near the silent jet bridge, a strange sound broke the eerie quiet. It was faint, but unmistakable, the tinny, upbeat music of a video game, drifting through the empty space like an odd beacon. Pat's ears perked up. Wait a minute, they whispered. I know that sound. That's Mario Kart. Their eyes lit up as they scanned the distance, as if hoping to spot the source of the cheerful chime. William rolled his eyes. This is hardly the time for video game trivia, he snapped. We're on the tarmac of an abandoned airport, for crying out loud. Put away the switch. Help us find a way inside. Yes, seriously, nerd, Kayla added, brushing herself off after her descent down the chute. Quit playing with the arches or mushrooms or whatever and focus. Pat reluctantly turned away, but they couldn't help glancing back, the music still echoing faintly. Meanwhile, Mitch looked over his shoulder suspiciously, eyeing the empty airport with his usual paranoia. Probably a trick, he muttered. Maybe the palm trees are behind it, trying to lure us in with their gamer propaganda. Finally, they gathered and headed toward the terminal doors, hoping they would lead them to answers, or at least to someone who could explain the strange silence enveloping the airport. The terminal stretched before them, its glass walls dark and foreboding, as though guarding secrets waiting to be uncovered. As they stepped into the dim terminal, they found their first hint of life, an abandoned pretzel stand, its warming lamp still on, keeping the pretzels soft and fresh. Next to it, a cooler hummed quietly, filled with bottles of soda, condensation beating on the glass. It was almost as if someone had just stepped away. Without much ceremony, they each grabbed a pretzel and a drink, savoring the unexpected snack. Kayla took a bite, then wrinkled her nose. "These aren't Mickey pretzels," she muttered. "It's not the same without the ears. Just more disappointment on this ridiculous trip." Pat, content with their pretzel, took a sip of their soda and ignored the growing tension around them. They were trying to savor the simple pleasure in the midst of chaos. Meanwhile, Mitch wandered off to examine a decorative palm tree standing by an information desk. He glared at it suspiciously, circling it like a detective sizing up a prime suspect. "Oh, you again, huh?" He sneered at the plant, hands on his hips. "Here to throw another wrench in the works, I bet. Don't think I haven't figured you out yet." William, who had finally taken a seat, closed his eyes, muttering about the meeting he'd missed. He drifted off, slumping against the counter. Within minutes, he was deep in a nightmare. In his dream, he sat across from his boss, who glowered at him over a stack of paperwork. "You missed your meeting," his boss said sternly, handing him a disciplinary write-up. "Your punishment? A meeting with Pac-Man." As if summoned by magic, a giant Pac-Man appeared, chomping toward William with alarming speed, as he clutched his 2-point reprimand in horror. Oblivious to the chaos swirling around him, Pat leaned against the counter, happily munching away, content with their pretzel break. The others were too busy spiraling into various grievances and existential crises. The pilot appeared with an urgent look in his eyes. "I found a fuel truck parked nearby," he announced. "If we want to get out of here, I'll need a few people to help fill the plane with aviation fuel. This isn't going to be a one-person job." Kayla, shaking her head in exasperation, rolled her eyes. "A fuel truck? I need a lightning lane out of here, not some amateur hour fuel up. I've got fireworks at Epcot tonight. I'm not missing those." Meanwhile, Mitch was still locked in a standoff with the decorative palm tree. His face flushed with intensity, he shouted at it as if he were a drill sergeant dressing down a new recruit. "Listen up, you leafy interloper. I know you're behind this time rip and every other disaster on this trip. Stand down or face the consequences." William, pacing and clearly unraveling, was frantically pressing buttons on his phone, trying to contact his union rep. "This is a violation of my contract rights." "No signal? Of course there's no signal. Someone will answer for this." He waved his phone in the air, hoping for a miracle, but the screen remained stubbornly silent. Pat, always one to pitch in, grabbed an extra pair of gloves and turned to the pilot. "Let's get this done," they said, nodding with quiet determination. A minor character, a young man with a baseball cap and a calm demeanor, joined them without hesitation. The three of them made their way outside to the fuel truck, leaving behind the chaos in the terminal. As they worked together to fill the plane's tanks, an odd calm settled over them, a sense of purpose that contrasted sharply with the self-centered rants and conspiracy theories still echoing faintly from the terminal. It seemed that while some people were determined to clutch to their grievances and delusions, others had stepped up to take matters into their own hands, prioritizing action over endless complaints. With every gallon they pumped into the plane, the way out of this bizarre, deserted airport drew a little. As they all gathered outside, the plane stood waiting, half-fueled and ready to go. But predictably, the group's attention was scattered. Mitch, who had spotted a stray broom leaning against the side of the terminal, seized it with a gleam in his eye. "Forget the plane," he declared, straddling the broom with exaggerated flair. "I'll do it myself!" With a dramatic flourish, he kicked off from the ground, flying in circles, shouting commands at invisible forces only he could see. "You're all too slow," he yelled over his shoulder. "Mitch is on the case." Kayla, meanwhile, had her own breakdown brewing. Staring into the distance, she launched into a tearful monologue. The Festival of Fantasy Parade. I had the perfect viewing spot, she whispered, her voice thick with despair. She looked up to the sky, then burst into an impassioned, if slightly off-key, rendition of Festival of Fantasy, waving her arms with all the theatrical energy of a performer in front of Cinderella's castle. At the same time, William, who had been trudging along with them, froze, squinting into the empty expanse of tarmac. His jaw dropped. There, at a makeshift desk that seemed to shimmer in the heat, sat his boss, a smirk on his face as he held up a gleaming golden trophy shaped like Pac-Man. 5 coworkers appeared behind him, clapping in eerie synchronization. William, his boss said with a sardonic smile, extending the trophy. Congratulations, you've won the Sandbagger of the Year award. William blinked, his mouth working soundlessly before he found his voice. I need my shop steward, he sputtered, searching frantically around for backup. Weingarten writes, this is a meeting, isn't it? The boss chuckled. Oh, no, Weingarten rights don't apply here, William. Not for award ceremonies. He leaned in, his voice a low, ominous rumble. And they certainly won't protect you from Pac-Man. The familiar waka waka sound filled the air as the mirage faded, leaving William clutching at empty space, eyes wide with terror. Meanwhile, Pat and the minor character from before had already boarded the plane, doing their best to ignore the surreal spectacles happening around them. The pilot sighed, glancing around at the bizarre scene on the tarmac, but he'd long since abandoned the hope of getting everyone focused. People, please, he called out, his voice weary. Mitch touched down from his broom flight, breathless and wide-eyed. Everyone, listen up, he shouted, waving his arms for attention. I've seen things. William's gone full pilgrim out there, praying on his knees to, well, someone or something. Probably his boss, but maybe his creator. Who knows at this point? Sure enough, 200 feet from the plane, William was kneeling on the cracked tarmac, hands clasped in fervent appeal, muttering pleas for forgiveness and bargaining with the unseen meeting gods to reverse his fate. Kayla, oblivious to William's spiritual crisis, squealed in delight. My boarding group's been called, she cried, clutching her phone. Of course, she wasn't talking about the plane. They hadn't issued boarding groups in hours, but rather her group for Cosmic Rewind at Epcot, which had just pinged in her Disney app. She proudly marched up the ladder the pilot had set up in place of the emergency slide, her nose high in the air as if she were boarding a VIP experience. One by one, the others followed, with Mitch stepping onto the ladder last. Oh, I'm coming all right, he muttered, casting one last disdainful look toward a nearby palm tree. And when I get home, I'll be filing a formal complaint to the UN about the palm tree conspiracy. Enough is enough! Just as the final passengers settled into their seats, a strange rumbling sound rose from the hills beyond the tarmac. Eyes wide with shock, they watched as 8 giant Pac-Man figures emerged from the shadows, chomping across the ground as if devouring the very landscape in massive bites. They moved steadily toward the plane, the waka waka sound growing louder and more ominous. William, still on his knees, looked up, gasping as he saw the fleet of hungry blades, yellow orbs closing in on him. Oh no, not Pac-Man, he wailed, crawling backward in terror. This wasn't in the job description. The remaining passengers peered out the plane windows, watching in horrified fascination as the Pac-Men devoured everything in their path, their jaws snapping at the tarmac with mechanical precision. With adrenaline surging, the pilot fired up the engines, hastily maneuvering the plane toward the runway. The growling Pac-Men continued to chomp away at the tarmac, but thankfully hadn't yet developed a taste for jet fuel. Yet, as the plane turned toward takeoff, a chilling sight appeared. One of the Pac-Men had honed in on William. William screamed, scrambling backward. No, I'm not one of the ghosts. I just missed my meeting. But his pleas went unheard as the oversized arcade icon closed in, swallowing him with a triumphant waka waka that echoed through the empty airport. The remaining passengers winced, but there was no time to linger. As the engines roared, Mitch threw himself dramatically against the window, pointing furiously at a cluster of palm trees near the runway. You see that? He shouted, voice thick with accusation. They're the ones behind this, probably acting as power pellets, boosting those yellow menaces. He scowled, shaking his fist at the trees as if they could hear him. With a shuddering breath, the pilot pushed the throttle, and the plane sped down the runway, lifting just as the Pac-Men noticed their would-be main course. The giant characters pivoted, chomping toward the plane with relentless determination, but they were too late. The jet's wheels left the ground, and the plane ascended, safely out of reach. The Pac-Men gathered below, staring hungrily after it, their meal slipping away. As the jet soared higher, Mitch leaned back with a sigh of relief, muttering, "Good luck next time, you fronded traitors," while Kayla was already updating her trip itinerary to account for her narrowly missed disaster. With the yellow menace fading below, they were finally headed toward safety, or so they hoped. As the plane leveled out, Kayla leaned back in her seat, a smug grin on her face. "Looks like Pac-Man's dining reservation got canceled," she announced, brushing imaginary dust off her shoulders. Pat, unfazed by the chaos and feeling inspired by the mention of food, mused aloud, "Whatever. Maybe I'll just grab something at Disney Springs when we land." They had visions of a cozy meal, maybe some churros, and a stop at the World of Disney store to unwind from this surreal experience. Meanwhile, Mitch, still deep in conspiracy mode, pulled out a notepad and scribbled furiously, muttering to himself, "Which UN branch handles plant-related war crimes? There has to be something in the Geneva Conventions about treacherous flora. Something." His gaze was laser-focused, as if he'd just uncovered an international scandal. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, breaking the strange moment of peace. "Good news, folks. We're at a safe altitude, and it appears dinner has officially been canceled for our oversized retro video game friends. We should be smooth sailing from here." A collective sigh of relief swept through the remaining passengers, each of them settling into their seats, each with their own strange reflections on the ordeal. But as the last glimmers of the chaotic airport faded into the night below, they couldn't help but wonder what other surprises might. As the plane cruised at a steady altitude, the pilot spotted something strange on the horizon, a swirling portal, shimmering with an ethereal light. It wasn't the first surreal sight of the day, but something about it felt promising, like it held the possibility of escape. The pilot spoke over the intercom. "Everyone, I know this is unusual, but I think if we head through that portal, it might just bring us back to reality. I suggest we all get some sleep. Let's treat this like Santa delivering us back to normal." The passengers, weary from their strange adventure, nodded in agreement. Even Mitch seemed willing to play along, though he eyed Pat's palm tree suspiciously one last time. "And you," he pointed sternly at the little tree, "don't even think about waking me up." With that, he slumped into his seat, the rest of the passengers following suit. The pilot activated autopilot, allowing the plane to glide smoothly toward the portal, and settled back himself, giving in to the first real rest he'd had since they took off. The plane drifted gently into the portal, and as they passed through, a warm blue light filled the cabin. Slowly, the soft gray tones of early morning turned into a bright blue sky, and the landscape below shifted, familiar landmarks taking shape. Just as they blinked awake, they caught sight of I-4 stretching below, winding its way through the sunny Florida landscape. They were back, or at least they hoped so. The pilot immediately tried the radio, dialing frequency after frequency, but was met with nothing but static. He sighed, muttering, "No answer. Still radio silence." Kayla sat up, her brow furrowing. "Do you think the video game followed us?" Mitch, now fully awake, nodded with grim determination. "Namco is behind this. I don't trust them. I say we get a lawyer, maybe a restraining order. We can't let them think they can stalk us through dimensions." The passengers exchanged uneasy glances. Had they truly left the nightmare behind? Or was it still lurking somewhere, a ghostly Pac-Man? The plane touched down at MCO without so much as a peep from air traffic control. As they rolled to a stop on the runway, the eerie silence confirmed what they all feared. The airport was deserted, not a soul in sight, not even a video game character lurking in the shadows. With no other options, the pilot deployed the emergency chute on a side door, and one by one, they slid out onto the tarmac. Each passenger slipped back into their usual routines as they regrouped. Kayla clutched her bag, muttering about lost Disney reservations and calculating exactly how much the airline owed her for this mess. Mitch, ever the palm tree conspiracy theorist, scanned the area as if expecting a row of potted palms to pop up at any moment. Pat calmly held onto their small palm tree as if it were a talisman, and Mitch shot it a suspicious glare. They made their way across the tarmac, entering the terminal through an open emergency exit. Inside, the silence was thick, hanging over them like a heavy blanket. But as they took a few steps forward, something odd began to happen. People started to materialize around them, pixelated and blurry, as if the world was loading on an old DSL connection. Figures phased into view with a strange lag, flickering and glitching like they were part of a poorly optimized video game. They exchanged uneasy looks, each of them watching the world reappear with a surreal lag, as if reality itself was struggling to catch up. The terminal filled slowly with people. Families in Hawaiian shirts, airport staff checking their watches, even a security guard munching on a donut, all frozen in place before suddenly snapping into motion with a jolt. The passengers stood still, absorbing the strange sight. Mitch, still paranoid, muttered, "Looks like the Matrix needs an upgrade." Finally, Kayla broke the silence. Do you think William's okay?" she asked hesitantly, glancing around. They all thought of William's last moments, his desperate pleas to his boss, and the terrifying final scene with Pac-Man. Was he gone for good? Or would he too reappear, glitched and lagging, in this half-loaded reality? The question lingered as they walked further into the terminal, wondering if they'd ever see their strange companion again, or if they themselves were now part of this new lagging world. As they entered the terminal, a group of TSA agents appeared, fully materialized now, and quickly escorted the passengers and pilot into a stark, fluorescent-lit office. The mood was tense, with everyone still rattled from the strange journey. The agents took their seats across from the passengers, and one particularly stern-looking FAA official fixed the pilot with a steely gaze. "Who authorized that landing?" the FAA agent demanded. The pilot, caught off guard, stumbled over his words. There was no one to authorize it. I made the decision to land because, well, the situation was beyond unusual." The FAA official scribbled notes, clearly unimpressed, then glanced at the passengers. "And you're saying you traveled through some kind of portal?" The disbelief was evident in his tone. Mitch folded his arms, his face dead serious. "Yes, and I'd say you need to get the UN involved, especially regarding the palm tree conspiracies." Kayla rolled her eyes, while Pat clutched their tiny palm tree, as if it might still offer some comfort. The questioning continued until someone from the Orange County Sheriff's Department entered the room, clipboard in hand. "We need to address the missing passenger," he announced, his tone grave. "You mentioned a William? He didn't make it back with you?" The group exchanged looks, recalling William's last moments and his eerie encounter with the Pac-Man. Kayla finally spoke up. "William didn't come through the portal. Last we saw, it was complicated. There was a giant Pac-Man involved." The officer raised an eyebrow, and the room went silent, each passenger uneasy under the weight of his gaze. "So you're telling me," he said slowly, "that a missing person, potentially deceased, may be connected to a video game character?" "Absolutely," Mitch confirmed, completely unfazed. "This is bigger than you think." The officer exchanged a glance with the FAA official, then returned to his notes. "Well," he said, "it appears that what started as a missing persons case may have just escalated into a murder investigation." His voice dropped ominously. "We'll be needing statements from each of you." The passengers sank back into their seats, each one realizing the bizarre situation they were now entangled in. Just as the questioning was becoming tense, one of the other passengers, a quiet woman who'd been seated at the back of the plane, cleared her throat and held up her phone. I actually filmed some of this," she stammered, her cheeks flushing as every eye in the room turned to her. "I mean, people always say pics, or it didn't happen, right?" The agents leaned forward as she hit play, and the surreal scenes unfolded on her screen. The empty plane, William's frantic breakdown on the tarmac, Mitch lecturing the palm tree, and, most importantly, the ominous Pac-Men chomping their way across the ground toward the plane. The officers and agents watched, jaws slack, as the footage played. After a moment of stunned silence, the Orange County officer cleared his throat, trying to maintain composure. Take that as evidence, he muttered, taking her phone. But just to clarify, we did contact William's employer and they confirmed no disciplinary action or unusual award ceremonies were issued. They have no idea what any of this is about. After another hour of questioning, during which the passengers recounted their journey through the portal, the time rip, and the bizarre series of events leading to William's disappearance, the officials finally released them. "You're free to go," the TSA agent announced with a sigh, looking as though he needed a vacation himself after hearing their story. The passengers filed out of the office. Kayla arrived at Disney's Polynesian Village Resort, eager to put the entire surreal experience behind her. As she recounted her wild journey through time rips, giant Pac-Men, and a mysterious disappearance to the cast member at check-in, the employees' eyes grew wide. "Well, I think that deserves a little extra magic," they said with a smile, upgrading her to a theme park view room and handing her a voucher for a complimentary Dole Whip at Pineapple Lanai. Kayla beamed, finally ready to embrace the Disney magic she dreamed of, with an epic story to tell. Meanwhile, Mitch was on a mission of his own. After securing his broom and supplies, he soared off to Key West, intent on confronting his longtime arch-rival, a Key West beach bartender rumored to be involved in the global palm tree conspiracy. Landing on the shores of his nemesis beach bar, Mitch wasted no time launching into a passionate tirade, warning locals and tourists alike of the leafy danger looming among them. Pat, content with simpler pleasures, found solace at the House of Blues in Disney Springs. They'd shared the story of their adventure with their server, who was so captivated that they called the manager over. Before long, Pat had been treated to a complimentary dessert, and the manager even handed them a $30 gift card as a thank you for the entertainment. Pat savored every bite, marveling at how they'd somehow landed themselves in a world of delicious food and new stories to tell. Even the pilot found his way back to his routine. After a debriefing with the FAA, he was pleasantly surprised to find that they considered his actions within reason. After all, no FAA handbook mentioned time anomalies or video game pursuers. With a nod of forgiveness from his superiors, he returned to the skies with a newfound appreciation for the mundane. And so, each of them found their own happy ending. Except for poor William, whose fate remained a mystery somewhere beyond the veil of time, his story lost to the glitches of another reality. But for everyone else, life had returned to its version of normal, flavored with the occasional shiver of remembrance for the time they'd all slipped beyond the borders of their own world. William's funeral was a somber affair, attended by family, friends, and colleagues who gathered to pay their respects and remember a man who had meant so much to them. His family shared memories of his kindness and dedication, his love for his work, and his unshakable loyalty to those around him. One by one, his coworkers and supervisors took turns recounting their favorite memories of William. His boss, fighting back tears, spoke warmly about their years working together. "I used to prank him now and then, just a bit of harmless office fun. But let me tell you, the so-called Sandbagger of the Year award, that was never one of them," he said with a sad smile. William didn't need such a title. He was the most dependable, prepared, and calm person in the room at every meeting. He was always on time, ready to get to work. Another coworker stepped up, adding, "If there was one thing William was known for, it was his advocacy. He never shied away from speaking up for what the team needed. He was our go-to guy for budget increases, and he always fought to make sure we had the resources we needed. He cared about the staff. He cared about all of us." As the eulogies continued, it was clear William was far more than a man who missed a single meeting or held a quirky award. To those who knew him, he was a dedicated advocate, a kind soul, and a friend who always had their back. Despite the surreal events surrounding his disappearance, his legacy was one of loyalty and commitment, and he would be deeply missed. After the ceremony, his family and friends lingered, sharing memories and bittersweet laughs. Though William's final moments remained shrouded in mystery, he would be remembered not for the strangeness of his last day, but for the steadfastness he had brought to every other. As the days passed, the strange adventure faded into a surreal memory, a bizarre story each of the passengers would retell for years. Kayla found herself at last in the heart of Disney, standing on Main Street, watching the fireworks burst above Cinderella's castle. The colors lit up her face as she grinned, finally able to bask in the magic she had longed for. For her, this was the true happily ever after, and she couldn't have been more content. Meanwhile, down in Key West, Mitch had embarked on his own version of closure. Standing in the warm coastal breeze, he glared at a towering palm tree just outside a beach bar, his arms crossed in defiance. "You think you're off the hook, huh?" he demanded, pointing an accusatory finger at the tree. "Oh no. You and your kind may have slipped through the cracks this time, but I'm watching you." The locals looked on, amused but used to Mitch's antics by now, and some even waved as he continued his one-sided tirade. To them, he was just another eccentric character on the island. But to Mitch, he was on a mission to bring justice to the fronded traitors he believed lurked in every shadow. As life carried on, each of them went their own way, forever connected by the strange journey they had shared. Kayla found her magic, Mitch found his purpose, however unconventional, and the story of their wild, which inexplicable adventure slipped into legend, leaving behind a legacy of laughter, mystery, and just a hint of magic.